Hey guys, in this episode I'm going to show you how to use lens flares in Photoshop. Hey guys, and welcome to Kelvin Designs. My name is Kelvin and I design, and that's why it's called Kelvin Designs. Click right here to subscribe to my YouTube channel and get all these tutorials as they come out, and click right here to subscribe to my newsletter and get a bunch of goodies, raw files, actions, Photoshop brushes, and all the files you need to follow along all my free tutorials. In this episode, I'm going to show you how to use lens flares in Photoshop. Now, we've all seen poorly used lens flares, a little too much, too obvious, and there is an actual nice way to use it to create a little more drama, a little more interesting lighting. So I'm going to start by showing you how to use it on a portrait, which you can see before right here, and after here. Now, a little more dramatic and more interesting lighting. And then I'm going to show you how to do lens flares on an urban landscape, which you can see the before right here and after right here. Much more dramatic, quite a few lens flares there, and I want to show you the technique here. You can tone it down if you want to, but I really wanted to go through the different methods of using it for lighting and for eye trail, blurring it, and there's quite a few interesting techniques. So let me show you how it's done. All right, so once you've downloaded the files from my website, it'll give you a folder, which you have to a zip file that you have to unzip into this folder here. And we'll start with Girl in Snow. And it's JPEG. We'll open it up in Photoshop. Here we go. I'm going to make this a little bigger and then zoom out again. So just I have this little artboard. Okay, so this is a JPEG. It's not a RAW file. It would have been better with a RAW file. This looks like it's been slightly retouched already. But I think that adding a little more drama and a lens flare could actually look good and not too corny. So let's start. First thing we're going to do is actually darken the whole image. It's very high key. So go here into the adjustment layers, and we're going to add a curves. All right, and we're going to darken considerably this photo. Maybe something like this. I don't want to flatline anything because that'll make big chunks, and it doesn't really matter how dark her face is, because what we're really trying to address right now is everything but her face. So let's just keep an eye on that. Okay, and there we go. That's pretty simple. Then we're going to take a brush over here, and we have 1760 zero hardness. All right, so it doesn't have to be exactly. This is just a something that works, and I have the opacity down to 50%. So if I go into the mask, and with the black in my foreground, I'm basically masking out my last adjustment. See the adjustment that we darkened, and I'm masking out her face. Okay, everything that's really just black. I want it to affect everything but her face, and this does the trick. So before and after. So I've gotten a lot of detail in the back here, and more than anything, more than detail, I've gotten it to be not completely white. We have some artifacting showing up, meaning these lines here, because it was a JPEG and compressed, not a RAW file. So bringing those pixels back will bring in some strange pixels and JPEG artifacts. So for now, that's fine. What we want is just to darken that, and that worked fine. All right, so one thing you should know about lens flares is that if I create a new layer that's transparent, I cannot just go and say filter, render, lens flare. It'll tell me that I couldn't do it because there's nothing there. So what I can do is go to my background image and hit filter, render, and lens flare. And so I can do a lens flare now. It's very light here, but let's say I had this lens flare and it wherever. Let's say it was over here or here, something like this. Now, the problem with that, and I hit OK, it's locked into that layer. I can't adjust this in any way. So that is a method of working that's a little destructive, and we're going to try to avoid that. So I'm going to hit Command-Z, and I'm going to create a new layer. Well, actually, I already did it, so I'm going to undo that. Up here in this layer here, we're going to go ahead and fill that over here, and we'll fill it with black. Okay, and now I'm going to tell this mode, changing the blending mode here from normal to screen. So what that means is that anything that's black is transparent, anything that's white or light shows up. You see, before, if I hide it or not, it doesn't show anything because it's filled with black. However, if I take my brush and I fill with white, it shows up. I'm going to go ahead and undo that. I want my lens flare to be around here. So I'm going to actually make a small dot here, something like this, maybe a little bigger, something like that. Okay, and make this 100%, like so. And I want the lens flare right around here. So just click right there, and when I go to Filter and Render Lens Flare, I should have that dot. You see that dot right here? Let me just hide this out. That dot is where I wanted my lens flare. Because we're doing it on a separate layer, I can now put this right there, and the light actually hides the dot. Let's bring this down just a notch, something like this. And I'd like to actually start with a 105 prime. But let's just do 100%, something like that, and hit OK. Now I'm going to do another one, another lens flare right on top of that, but this time I'm going to do the 50 to 300, and it's so now I'm basically mixing two different lens flares exactly on the same spots. Except this one, I'm going to go a little bit stronger on. Let me just compare that. Yeah, something like that. Okay. So 140, 142 actually. Something like that. Okay. Pretty good. It's pretty strong. And so the next thing that I see is that it's a little too saturated, and it's I don't really want that rainbow there, or not, at least not quite that strong. So I'm going to go ahead and create a adjustment layer here, Hue Saturation, and I'm going to desaturate this considerably, but I don't want it to desaturate the background, just this one. So by holding the Alt or Option key in between these layers, I'm going to click right there, and now this desaturation only applies to the lens flare, and you can see the before and after right here. Okay, now I do want a warmer tone to this. It's very blue in the back, and I want it to feel like there's a warm sun. So I'm going to go ahead and create another adjustment layer, and this time it'll be a photo filter, and it's by default a warming filter. The difference is I'm going to increase that density, and I'm going to exaggerate it quite a bit, and that's okay. I can always come back and sort of adjust this if I want to. Okay, and then I'm going to create another curves layer, and we're going to create a little bit of contrast by darkening our darks over here and lightening our lights just a touch, or what's called an S-curve. Light and dark, and let's do this a little more and a little more. Okay, so this is a common way of increasing contrast by adding an S-curve. I'm lightening up a little too much, so I'm going to go easier on this end here and darken just a notch here and see how that goes. All right, it's better. I like that. Okay. Okay, and so it's maybe just a little. I'm going to bring this down here. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do after this point is I want to create a new layer from everything that I've done. And to do that, you hit the Command-Alt-Shift-E. And on a PC, it's Control instead of Command. And I now have a flattened version of all these layers. And I want to do a, let me just hide this here. I'm going to convert this layer, which is the flattened version of everything we've done, and convert this to a smart object. And what that means is that if I go and create a camera raw filter, which is what I'm doing right now, I can go back and adjust it. So part of what I want to do is bring the highlights down a little bit, open up the shadows just a touch, increase the clarity just a little bit, something like that. And I also want to give it a little bit more of a warmer tone in my white balance. Maybe a little bit of magenta, not too much. Something like this. Okay, and I can turn down the vibrance just a notch. Okay. Hit OK on that. That's pretty nice. I forgot to do one thing. Double click in there. See, I'm back in here. That's why I did the smart object. Had I hit OK on the other one, it would have applied it to the pixels. So I'm going to actually bring this down just a little too much. And bring this down a little bit too. Something like this. Bring the vibrance back a little bit. What I did want is go in the effects panel here and I want to do some post-crop vignetting. Something like this. So I like that. Actually, it's pretty good. And let's see how that looks. Okay, that's pretty good. Now, there's a lot of artifacting. You see these lines here, and we're going to deal with that in one moment. So if we go to Quick Mask over here, and you take a gradient, and it's from foreground to background, which you can see here, foreground to background. It's the second one in your default gradients. And we're going to go and click, hold down the shift key to make it straight, and let go. That means that the gradient goes from here to here. And I'm going to do the same thing right around here, and a little bit over here. Okay, so I have a selection that goes everything that's where you see that's red is selected. Maybe a little bit over here. Okay, now when I go out of Quick Mask, all these pixels are now selected, and I'm on this layer, right? And so I can go ahead and blur, Gaussian blur. Except it's undoing. I'm gonna have to. I can't do that actually on the. I'm gonna have to do another Command Alt Shift E. So here we go, another layer, and I can now filter, blur, and Gaussian blur. And take that around here. That's pretty strong. 20 is pretty good. But you see, before I have all these weird pixels. So before, after. And I want to get rid of all of that. I want it really smooth. Okay. So before and after. That's good. Now I can deselect. Now the difference between these two is the blur. And I kind of like that it gets blurry. Looks like a focal depth thing going on here, which I actually really like. All right, so you have that first use of the lens flare on this, and we can actually compare. I'm going to make a copy of the original here and bring it on top, just so we can kind of compare before and after, which I really like. It kind of puts a lot of attention and warmth right here. So that's the first one. And all right, I'm going to go ahead and delete the original one and go ahead and save as. And we're going to go and put this in here, girl.snow.psd. Okay, and just go ahead and save that. Okay, cool. So now I've closed this. It's still saving. Okay, it'll close when it's done saving. All right, so for our second project in using lens flares, we're going to open up the bridge.jpg right here. So right click, open with Photoshop, and here we go. So I'm going to do the same thing. I zoom in and zoom back out, so I have a little bit of a artboard around it. I like to have that. Okay, so the first thing you should know is that in the second part of the tutorial, the lens flares we'll be using is actually only compatible with the latest version of Photoshop, which to date is the Creative Cloud 2015. And this uses lens flares on smart objects. And if you have an older version, you're going to have to use the methods that I used in my in the first part of this tutorial, meaning creating a layer of black and moving it around. If you do have the more recent version of Photoshop, then you can follow along. And so to do that, you have this background layer, and you right-click on that and convert it to a smart object. And what that means is that now all the filters that you apply remain editable, which is really cool. So filter, render, and lens flare. And here we go. And we'll start with a 50 to 300. Let's go a little light, something like this, maybe even lighter. All right. The good thing is we can come back here and change it because it's on a smart object. I'll show you what this means. Here, if I hit OK, so I add a little light right in that light, right? You see it created smart filters with lens flare. If I double click on here, I'm like, oh, you know what? This light maybe needs to be moved right there. Hit OK, done. Before, it would have applied it onto the layer, and if you got it wrong, well, tough luck. You're gonna have to Command Z or undo and then come back, and it was just permanently rendered into the pixels. Whereas here in a smart object, it's not, which is really nice. The other really nice thing is I can go ahead and hit filter, and render and lens flare, and it's going to add a second one to the same one. To the same layer, I can add 2 lens flares. Let's make this one a little bit lighter just to have a little difference. Something like that. Okay. Now granted, it's pretty symmetrical. It's not 100% symmetrical, which is nice. So let's go ahead and go in here and just bring these down. Let's make them 30, just so that they're lighter. I just wanted a little sense of that light, not too strong, and that'll be the starting point. We'll come back to this in a moment. The other thing we want to do is we want to darken the sky a little bit. Okay. To darken the sky, we will create a curves, and we're going to bring this down, something like this. Okay, and then take the gradient tool, which is already selected, black to transparent, and I'm going to click from here, holding down the shift, up to here. It's a little too abrupt, so undo that. I'm going to bring it up even higher. So it created a gradient in the mask, which means it's hiding everything here. And so I'm basically only darkening the tar part of the image. One thing I wanted to do actually in this first part is go in here and create a camera raw filter. Okay. And in this camera raw, what we're going to do is warm it up a little bit. So by a little bit, I mean quite a bit actually. Something like plus 19, add a little magenta, plus, let's go as far as 25. Okay. And let's just tone down the highlights a notch. Something like this. 30 is good. And then open up the shadows, maybe even more. Something like that. Okay. Yeah, like that. When you have cobblestones and a lot of detail, I have a tendency to like to increase the clarity. It kind of brings out that, don't want to make it too much like a comic book, but it brings in that sort of really sharp, cool details in there, almost like it was raining, and I see all that detail. It's almost shining, which I really like. So something like that. Huge difference. So let's hit OK on here, and you see it's like it's warmed up. It brought these lens flares kind of to light, and kind of brought everything out, which is really nice. All right, and then we have our Darkening Skies, so that's nice. And I think we should add a little more contrast. Let's go here and create another curves, and just do a little S curve, just not too strong, but something that would add a little more contrast. Something like this. Let's see that before, after. All right, all these things adding a little more drama to this photo. And okay, that's pretty good. Now we're going to use the trick that we used earlier in this tutorial, which is to create a new layer. And we're going to go ahead and fill it with black. Okay, and let's hide this for a second. And we want to make a lens flare as central as possible because we're going to use that as an actual light. So it's another cool use for lens flares. So if I go here and hit render and lens flares, and I can go ahead and make this, let's do 100, something like this. And let's just bring this as central as we can, something like this. You can go ahead and look through which one looks sort of the most normal. I think the 50-300 is sort of the easiest one. Kind of bring it down, see how we don't want it too strong. We just want a little bit of this lighting effect, right? Something like this. Hit OK. And now we can put this in screen mode, as we did earlier. Now I have, the reason I did it perfectly centered is so that when I move it, it's just this round lamp. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but it's kind of chopped on the top and on the bottom, and we're going to fix that in a second. We're actually going to, right away, let's just make this a little bit smaller, something like this. Holding down the Alt and the Shift key. Okay, hit OK on that. And then I'm going to create a mask, and using the gradient tool, I'm going to go ahead and go from here to here. And I'll do the same around here. I'll do the same around here. And I'll do the same around here. So I've created a sort of a blurred mask on there. Okay. What I really want is this light. So I'm going to go ahead and use this light, and I'm going to position it over this light. And granted, it's much too big right now. Go ahead and make this a little bit smaller, something like so. Because even though I have this light over here with creating this big sort of lens flare, I want this light itself to be having a secondary sort of a glow around it that's created by the lens flare, which I kind of like. So something like this, and then I can go ahead and hold on the Alt key, which will make a copy of that. You see, it creates a new layer, and I can just bring this over here, and I can use the arrow keys to move it around if I want, and pretty simple. I also see there's a lamp back here and a lamp back here. Very easy. Hold on the Alt key, bring it over again. This time use the Command T, because we do need it to be considerably smaller. Maybe like this, something like that. And the opacity is a little strong. Let's go in here and say 70. Too light. Let's do 80, something like that. And now I can Alt click that and bring it over here. And now we got another light over there. So I can go ahead and actually change the opacity of this light if I feel it's a little too strong, or the lights don't align. This light's a little to the right, this light is a little to the left, so maybe make this one centered and then go back to this one and say, okay, well, this window is considerably smaller, so it's not as easy. So go here and try to move it just a notch, and there we go, that's better. Let's go to this one and try to move it to the right a little bit, something like that. There we go. All right, that's actually much better. Okay, so we've got these lights kind of, this is cool. And there's another really neat trick in using lens flares or lighting, which is to use behind and in front and make, I'll show you. The first thing we're going to do is make a selection of the skyline. So to do that, we're going to take the quick selection tool, okay? And let's go and let's zoom in a little bit. And let's go over here and try to just get some of the skyline, okay? Doesn't matter that it's very precise. I don't want that, so hold down the Alt key to get rid of that. And I need this peak to be part of it. This part doesn't matter too much. It's really this end that kind of matters. And again, you'll see why it doesn't have to be very precise. Whoops, I do not want that. Command Z. Okay, something like this is actually pretty good. And I'm going to go ahead and go to the very top here, create a group, and mask. So I've used the mask on the group. So whatever I put in here will have this mask applied. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is create a new layer, and I don't want it in the group yet. We'll use the group in a minute. And let's go ahead and fill this with black. Okay. And now I'm going to put this in screen mode, and I want my lens flare to be right behind there, so it's kind of just you're looking in the distance at this light. What I'm actually going to do is use the direction I want. I want a big lens flare, but I want it to kind of come down to the bottom right. So, filter, render, lens flare, and let's just make this considerably bigger for now. And the direction we want is something like this, right? It starts here and it kind of goes down this way. That's kind of like the eye trail that I want. Something like this, and we'll do something like this, and we'll bring it down a notch, and then hit OK. And I'm going to go ahead and do it again. Render, lens flare. I'm going to mix it with this one, which I like too. Something like that. Pretty strong. Okay. So now, when I move it, I can put it where I actually want it, which is right here. Okay. Now, granted, we have this border, which we can get rid of pretty simply. But here's what's really cool. If I put this in this group, it's going to only show behind. First of all, that looks kind of cool. But then if I want to have a bit in front and a bit in the back, I make a copy of this. I drag this down to the new layer down here, and I bring it outside of the group. Okay. And then this one, I'm going to say, you know what, this should be around 60% because I want to see a little bit of that. This one can stay at 100%, but my mask here, which was, you know, the cityscape, I wanted to feel like it's glowing. So to do that, I go here and filter and go to the blur and Gaussian blur right here. Let's see, I don't want it too strong. Maybe something like this. You see that little bit of blur. It feels like it's organic and it's glowing out of here. It's really makes it look really like a diffused lighting. I really like that. So just a little bit of blur. That's why the selection wasn't 100%. It didn't have to be super precise. Hit OK on that. And one thing I should have done to start with in here is to get rid of this hard line, create a mask. Go to my gradient here, and let's just click from here down to here, and the same from here to here. Okay, now this command click this selection here and apply it to this as well. That way we have them both. Okay, so now I still have that light. Now I can always, you know, this is the front light. We should probably name these front light and back light. This is the one that's behind the cityscape. This is the one that's in front. I could make this one a little lighter. Let's do this at 50. And maybe this one, let's do 90. Or even, I don't know, let's just play with this, see how it goes. I don't want it too light because it's supposed to be so strong that it's blurring out the vision over there of this building. So something like this is pretty good. Okay. And so that's pretty cool. I like that. One thing I could do is, remember when I warmed up the photo up over here, which was in the camera raw. I went over here and I warmed everything up. The problem is when I used these lens flares, which are their own colors, they kind of took out that warmth right in the center there. So I can do one of two things. One, easiest thing is to go in here and do a hue saturation on the actual lens flare. So image adjustments, hue and saturation, and I could even colorize and go into a nice warm. Let's go a little more towards this color here. Okay, let's see that before, after. See how it got rid of all that coldness and just kind of warmed it up. So hit OK on that, and I do the same here. Auto adjustments, whoop, and just colorize. Here, I could have held down the Alt key and I would have done the same. Would have applied the same exact hue set, but I kind of wanted it to be a little different so it didn't look too monochrome. There's a tendency to get an organic feel when you do it at two different steps. So like this, that's pretty cool. I like that. Cool. And then there's another thing you can also do, which I have a tendency to do quite a bit when I'm done with my retouching, is hold down the Command Alt Shift E like I did in the earlier image, and I have this, and then convert this to a smart object, and now go into Filter, Camera Raw, and in here I'm going to add the effects of a post-crop vignetting. I want to close this photo up a little bit, something like this, and I might even, let's try to do a little bit of a closing out the highlights, open up the shadows a touch, a little more clarity, and that's pretty cool. I like that. Okay, hit OK on that, and there we go. And there you go. So there's some lens flares for you. Some can be done overly done. Some you can always tone it down, but here's a cool way to use them. All right, guys, I hope you liked this episode and I hope you learned something. It really helps me out if you share it on Facebook and Google+, and leave me a comment below if you want a tutorial that I can do or any questions. I'll see you in the next episode.